Good morning, everyone. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of Ask Us Anything About Records Management. Today's presenters are Jamie Brinkman and Arthur Siegel. Jamie is the Archives Records Advisory Officer for Villages and Cornell Cooperative Extensions, and Arthur is with our Scheduling and State Agency Services staff. And we also have with us Sarah Durling, who is our Records Advisory Officer for Schools. This session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box to the right side of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will now turn the presentation over to Jamie.
Thanks, Rich. Do you happen to have the slides to put up on the screen?
Yes, the slides are there. You should see the tab. Can you, let's see, you don't see anything?
I just see your name.
That's strange. You know what you may want to do? You should, why don't you just log off and log back on again, see what happens.
Okay.
And in the meantime, I will just let folks know that this session is being recorded. So if you have any questions about it or you want to see it later on, you can view it at your own leisure. The recording should be available by the end of today, hopefully, if everything goes well. And I see that we are getting a few questions already.
That's awesome. Rich, why don't you give folks a rundown of what we're doing in terms of training this season?
Sure, that sounds great. So we've got a number of great webinars for you. A number of them, most of them are new. So we've already had Get Ready for the Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund webinar, which happened on the 16th. And if you're interested in a Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund grant, you can certainly view that webinar. We encourage you to go to our website and talk to your applicable records advisory officer for that. It's never too early to start talking about it or working on a grant if you're local government. Of course, today is Ask Us Anything About Records Management. In February, next month, the 27th, we've got Disaster Response for Records Managers with Paula Fish and Michael Martin. In March, the 27th, we've got Email Essentials with Jamie and Maria McCashin. In April, we've got Ask Us Anything About Inactive Storage with Michael Martin and Monica Hauk-Wielton, as well as Keith Swaney, who manages our record center at the state campus. In May, the 29th of May, we've got Creating File Plans with Jamie Brinkman and Vincent Camiso. And in June we'll have June 26th, that will be Establishing Records Management Policies and Procedures. And that will be with Monica Hauk-Wielton and Karen Robiton. And that basically sums up, that's our lineup for the spring. And probably around July, August timeframe, we'll start putting out our fall offerings. And if you got any interest, questions, like to see something, certainly contact us. We'll be happy to talk to you about that, to entertain your requests. Jamie, how are things?
Well, this is why you're producer extraordinaire, Rich, because that worked. I can see the slides.
Oh, phew. Well, I was actually that was a crapshoot. So anyway, good. All right, excellent. Well, I'm going to go ahead at this point. I will change Jamie's role to make her the presenter, and I will turn it over to Jamie.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rich. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Again, we are having our Ask Us Anything About Records Management. That is a pretty wide and general topic, so you can shoot us questions about pretty much anything, and we can do our best to answer. So quick rundown of how this webinar will go. The panel, which is Arthur and Sarah, will be answering questions that have been submitted by email prior to the webinar. And while we're answering those questions, the audience can submit questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to get to almost all of those questions. If we don't get a chance to get to your question, don't worry. We will answer offline and make sure that you get an answer to your question. The first one we're going to start off with, I am sure that a lot of people are wondering what's happening with the 2025-2026 algorithmic grant cycle. Unfortunately, we don't have too much of an update from our webinar 2 weeks ago. The guidelines are in the hands of the budget. We're waiting for their approval. Once we get the approval, the guidelines of the guidelines will establish a timetable and publish that it's ready to go. It'll probably be in our newsletter, so keep an eye out. All right, Sarah and Arthur, are we ready?
Totally.
I assume Arthur's ready too.
Arthur is just as excited.
So the first question we have, I'm a new records management officer, or RMO for the newbies out there, and I have no idea where to start. What are some things I can do as I get settled into my new responsibilities?
So I have some thoughts. Congratulations! You are a records management officer. It's the best thing ever. Everybody loves records management. You're going to be widely celebrated. First things first, as you're getting settled in, my recommendation is to familiarize yourself with your program in your organization, whether it's a state agency or a local government. How are things running? How have records been managed historically going forward? What are the workflows? Where are things being stored? What records are being created? What policies and procedures you have in place? So you get an understanding of how things work before you start diving in and making changes, because that can be a process. Next, I recommend reaching out to the state archives, state advisory services for the state agencies, or the local government advisory services for the local governments. The local government ones are broken up into different advisory officers, and I will throw a link in the chat to all of our contact information in just a second. But we can help you kind of get started with the stuff that we have at the archives, what policies and procedures, what documents you should look at, what training tools we have. For example, we have a pair of webinars that we gave last year. They're recorded. They're on our website right now, called Your Role as a Records Management Officer, and there's one for state agencies and there's one for local governments because you do have slightly different responsibilities. And I would recommend, watching those, getting an understanding of what you're looking at for your job, and, then reaching out to us with any questions you have. Also, getting familiar with your retention schedules. If you're a local government, that's the LGS1, and that's on the website. And we will, and that was issued in 2020 and updated in 22. If you are still using any of the old schedules, the ED1, the MU1, the CO2, the, which one am I missing? Was the MI or the MU? One of them. Anyway, if you're using the old schedules that are not the LGS1, you can no longer use that schedule anymore. It is no longer valid. Your government does need to update, adopt the LGS1 via resolution, and we can talk you through that. If you are a state agency, there is the general schedule, and then you have individual RDAs that are specific to your agency. Again, reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you in any way you can. Arthur, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was certainly good information, but I would also say that we have information on our website that you can go to. We have an introduction for records managers page that provides a lot of information about the duties and responsibilities of an RMO, guidance for new RMOs just starting out, tips on sustaining a strong records management program, links to various forms you may need to use, things like that. So I would definitely go there as well. And at least for state agencies, I don't know like how common this is, but if the old RMO still is around, maybe that's a person to reach out to also. They would have had some experience, obviously being an RMO, so that's also may be something that you can tap as well.
Oh, definitely. That's a great idea.
Great ideas, both of you. And I just dropped the link to the webpage that Arthur was mentioning for everyone. Uh, Arthur, do you quickly want to answer what an RDA stands for? Somebody in
It's
the
a
chat asked.
Yeah, it's a records disposition authorization. It's basically a form that provides information, detailed information about a record. You know, what the record is in the description, what the volume of the record is, and also, you know, what the retention and disposition of a record series is going to be. And that's something that, you know, um, state agencies create with the help of the state archives to basically provide authorization to dispose of records is what it is. So without an RDA, you can't dispose of records legally. With an RDA and that authorization, you do have the permission to destroy a record or, you know, send it to the archives depending on what the final disposition is.
Great, yeah, and though for everyone, RDAs are state agency specific, so local governments, you can take a sigh of relief. This doesn't apply to you. So the next question we had came in through email. It's a little bit of a two-parter. Is there a requirement to have a paper copy of electronic files if the records are backed up to the cloud and also in the hard drive of the computer? Is that sufficient? I don't know, Sarah, do you want to take this one? You are our electronic records guru.
I do love electronic records. They're my favorite thing ever. So, yeah, there generally isn't a requirement to have a paper copy of electronic files. If a file is born digital, it can stay digital. You can also convert many of your paper records to electronic files, provided that you follow specific guidelines on doing that. So for example, if you have paper records that you want to digitize, you have to make sure that you are following our digital imaging guidelines in order to be able to legally do so, and particularly if you have the intention of destroying the paper. So the digital imaging guidelines are on our publications page. Rich, can you go dig up the publications page and throw the link for that in the chat?
Sure,
Which
Sarah.
will tell you the resolutions we're looking at, acceptable file formats, acceptable storage, which is going to get into that second question right there, for your records, and also talk about image verification and any requirements that you do have to hold on to your paper records. For that very specifically, any records that are 1910 and older have to be maintained in paper. You can scan them, that's totally okay, but you have to keep the paper copies. Generally speaking, there's not a lot of requirements beyond that and what you have to keep in paper. I do recommend that you keep your your minutes, if you have paper copies, totally digitize them. Makes it so much easier if you index them to find what you're looking for, right? But because nobody enjoys, and well, maybe there are people out there that enjoy, you know, poring over minutes from the 1950s that are in a very, very loopy cursive, trying to find that one item in it, right? But it makes it easier and faster to find what you're looking for. But I do recommend that you still keep the paper copies. They're very foundational documents to your government. They might have some intrinsic value for historical purposes. So those are kind of important records I would recommend, even if you digitize, you keep in paper. The trick with electronic records generally, and particularly when you're digitizing them, is that you are making a commitment to have those records available for the duration of their retention period. So if you have a 6-year record, that's not such a big deal, because while technology changes quickly, in 6 years, you probably still can open that record and access it. But when we start talking about records that are 20 years, 55 years, permanent records, it's not enough to simply have the file. You have to be able to open it and get to the information inside of it. So you have to have a plan, and you have to work with your IT department, who are going to be your best buddies for this, to develop a plan to move records across platforms and formats and systems so that you can continually access them for the rest of their life. And you know that it's a commitment. You have to think about that. It's not where you can put a box of paper records in a closet, and so long as you don't have a water leak or the building doesn't burn down, they're probably still going to be okay in 70 years. When it comes to storage, we absolutely want you to store your electronic records in a server environment with backups. This is going to help ensure that they are to reduce the possibility of loss, that you can recover them as needed. When you have them on a device that doesn't have a backup to it, that isn't networked, so like on your C drive or on a flash drive or on a thumb drive, the opportunity for them to become lost becomes much more significant. You drop your thumb drive, you accidentally smash the CD because you're using it as a coaster. Your computer, which you have been using for years and years and years and has all of this really valuable information on it, gets changed out. It gets surplused. It gets assigned to somebody else because you've retired, you've won the lottery and run off to Aruba because it's warmer there. And all that information gets lost because for whatever reason, your government doesn't have policies on how to handle the records of people who are leaving. So really, you want to make sure that they're in a backed up server environment. The cloud is definitely a possibility, but it's one of those things that's going to be very dependent on what resources you have and what's available to you. I do want to note when you are digitizing records, for the most part, you can make these decisions on your own. However, if you are a local government who has vital records, or if you are or you have court records, you do need to contact their respective controlling agencies. So for vital records, you need to talk to the folks in vital records at DOH, and if you're talking court records, you have to talk to the folks down in OCA, the Office of Court Administration, to get permission to digitize those before you do so.
Yeah, Arthur, is there anything you want to add about like state agency side of things? Do they have a requirement
No.
for paper copies for electronic records that are their official copy?
No, but I do want to reiterate the what Sarah said about or alluded to about that electronic records are subject to the same retention requirements as paper records. So again, you'll need to make sure that like your files are accessible and readable for the full retention period. But I also want to like address quickly the flip side of that, and that because simply because they're in electronic files and maybe not taking up the kind of physical space that paper records do, even though they do take up server space, that they should be subject to the retention requirements and not just kept indefinitely because they're not really taking up the same sort of physical space that you see with paper records. So like um, because a record is an electronic format, you shouldn't just like kind of keep it forever simply because it's convenient to do so. They really should be subject to retention requirements because you do have things like legal discovery, FOIL, and other issues that could potentially be problematic if you're keeping records too long, and that goes for electronic as well as paper.
Yeah,
Yeah,
always have a reason, never just because.
yeah, that's a good point, Arthur. Thanks. I instantly thought about inboxes and how I've had people say to me, my server's yelling at me because I have no more space. Email is a record too, and there are retention periods. So there's a way to delete them safely and comfortably. And that's something you can talk to any of your RAOs or the scheduling department about tackling those. There's also a webinar in May hosted by yours truly and Maria. uh, so our next question, we're going to answer this question and then we will answer some from the chat, I think, Rich, if there's some that are ready to go. So this question has to do with online payments made through the village website and whether or not those receipts fall under schedule item 514. Residents and non-residents can currently pay water bills, tax bills, and miscellaneous bills for things like permits, tax certificates, etc. through the village website. Parentheses, it's a third-party payment processor. Sarah, this might be a good one for you to answer.
Yeah, I looked this one up. This is going to be, and you're right, it's 514. You want sub item A. This is going to be part of the customer's individual account. Noting this is a great question to ask. This sort of question is a great question to ask your records advisory officer or your advisor in state agency services, because it does take a minute to look some of this stuff up, and particularly when they're more complicated. I'm happy to answer whatever shows up in the chat today, but these might take understand that if they're complicated, we might have to say, you know, we'll get back to you afterwards because we're going to have to look into this a little bit more.
Great. So I think at this point, we'll see if there's any questions in the chat box. Rich, do we have any?
Yes, Jamie, we've got about 4 or 5 here.
Great.
Got a question here from Katie. Are there guidelines about how files should be destroyed, shredding versus incinerating?
Oh, yeah, I am guessing we probably have something online in the topics page or publications, but Sarah and Arthur might know a little bit more than I do about that.
We don't have any specific rules as to what you can and can't do so long as it's legal in your area. I mean, open burns are generally one of those things that are not widely accepted. Although if you want to put things in a barrel in the back of the parking lot at the end of the year and have a party while you burn records, to destroy them, I mean, I'm not going to tell you you can't. Um, Generally speaking, my recommendation is always to destroy records in the most secure fashion possible that is not going to land you on the nightly news. So when records are ready to be destroyed, secure shredding or secure recycling for your paper is probably your best option. When we're talking about your electronic records, you're probably going to want, depending on what you're doing with the technology, you can't always straight up destroy your hard drives or whatever storage media they're on. But also you can also look at doing a secure wipe of your hard drive. Or running specialized software to delete those records, because you can't just hit the delete button for your electronic records and call that deleted, because they're still on in your memory somewhere until that memory gets overwritten. So again, electronic records, talk to your IT department because they're going to be able to help you best with that. But for your paper records, you have some options.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah. I have a question here from Sandy. How long after expiration date do we need to keep mass gathering permits and public assembly operating permits? You may have sort of addressed that, but I'm not quite sure.
Um, Sandy, can you send that question to the rec management email address, and we will make sure that you get the answer to that. I will put the address for that in the chat.
Yes, and I also have Sandy's information too, so just in case I can get that to our folks as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question from Lisa. If your official records are electronic, uh, what records do you recommend also having as hard copies? But I'm not sure if that's if I really get that question. Maybe Lisa can clarify. I'm not sure if RAOs any or our panelists any thoughts. If your official records are electronic,
Mhm.
what records do you recommend also having hard copies for, I suppose?
Okay. So we generally don't have a strong stance on whether you keep your official copy as paper or electronic, so long as you're able to maintain it appropriately for the duration of its lifespan. So if you have your official copy is your electronic copy and that is sufficient for your needs, and then that's fine. Again, it's the big caveat there is generally anything 1910 and older, because that's going to be born paper anyway. You have to hold on to the paper whether you digitize it or not. After that, it's really much more up to your own discretion.
Okay, we have a question from Catherine here. It's a pretty specific one about the retention period for pool attendance schedules. She says here that the MU 20 states after the season, MU I-364 states 6 years. So maybe a little bit of some confusion there.
Yeah, it sounds like you still might be on the old municipal schedule and need to move over to the LGS one. And again, I'm going to refer you to the rec management email address so that we can talk about that further and answer your retention questions offline.
Okay, and we have a question here from Nathan. Our village plans to renovate a completely new space for a record storage room. Are there any minimum standards for a storage room that we must adhere to? For example, fire suppression, HVAC/climate, shelving layout, etc. Also, does New York State have a list of preferred or suggested vendors for the supplies and equipment needed?
All right, hold on a sec. Again, retention period questions, folks. Can let's see. This is going to take me a minute to look this up. My apologies.
Sarah, would the guidelines for storage of inactive government records publication be a good resource for somebody looking to update their storage room?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great starting point. We also have some things over in the in our webinars that they'd be interested in as well. We've had a couple of inactive record storage training recently that they would find useful.
Great. I somehow started sharing my screen when I was just trying to copy and paste the publication in there. So I apologize, everyone.
And that's it for the questions here, everyone, for this point in time, at this point in time.
All right, great. We'll get back to some of the slides. So our next question came in and it was asked, do you have any experience with joining professional organizations related to records management, such as Nagara or AIIM, and are they beneficial for a state entity? We would like some more education specific to records management and are considering joining a professional organization if we think it would be helpful to our cause. Arthur, I think this one has you written all over it.
Yeah, okay. So the New York State Archives is a member of NAGARA. It's the National Association of Government Archives and Records Administrators. We're also a member of SAA, or the Society of American Archivists. Well, NAGARA does offer good practical webinars, which archive staff regularly attend, and also chat rooms where members can share information. But to start with, you may want to get involved with your local chapter of ARMA, the Association of Records Managers and Administrators. You might also get involved with the New York State Forum, as many of their meetings and subgroups deal with aspects of records management, even if they're not always explicitly about records management. The State Archives also offers regular records management training like this via webinars to state agencies and local governments. We can also provide customized training to agencies on various topics. Or if there's a topic you think would benefit yourself or other agencies or local governments, please let us know so we can develop it.
Great. And Sarah, is there anything that we would recommend for local governments who might want to get more involved?
For local governments, I would recommend, there's a couple of different things you can do. So a lot of you have county-based records management organizations, town clerks for certain counties, village clerks. There's also a number of school business official organizations that you are sometimes county, sometimes regional, that you could get involved in. There is Nagara, NIALGRA, my apologies, which is the New York Local Government Records Officer Organization, which has a conference every year. They're really solid and helpful. If you're a town, there's the Association of Towns. So there's a lot of stuff available to you out there in terms of organizations that might be of interest and helpful. Also, just getting involved in your local chapter of ARMA. ARMA is the National Records Management Organization. The local chapters often offer training and information that would be of use to you. And then, just kind of hanging out with us.
Yes, we love talking about records management, so
Mhm.
you can always chat with us too. All right, great. Our next question came in to us through email, and we were asked, when you have newly affected officials or employees, do you have a standard form or letter or conversation to discuss record retention and their role and responsibility in it? Do we have an easy button for this? I don't know, Sarah and Arthur, what do you think?
Alas, we do not. And there are definitely things that you can do. Every organization runs records management slightly differently. There are some cases where in local governments, it's an elected position. It's built into their jobs already. Your town and village clerks. If you're a fire district, your secretary is automatically your records management officer. That's part of that job. Other state agencies and local governments really do have a lot more leeway in terms of who ends up being the records management officer, and how that plays into their job can be very different. Because at the end of the day, while the records management officer is the person who's legally responsible for oversight of the program and the decisions that are made, they may or may not be the person on the ground doing the actual work, the day-to-day work, labeling boxes, putting things on shelves. They might be the oversight of the folks who are doing that. So you do have to look at what your government is doing and develop a plan and maybe your elevator speech based on that. But for both that role and the role of all employees, because records management is everybody's responsibility. It's not just the records management officer and their liaisons and staff. You really want to put together something about their responsibilities for records management and put it into their intake training. When you hire somebody and you are training them on all of the administrative stuff that they are responsible for, records management should be part of that discussion because they are responsible for maintaining records in their custody for however is decided for your organization until either it's sent to storage or it's disposed of. And you want to make sure that they are following the rules and regulations that you have in place for that. And then obviously for the records management officer, that's probably a little more in-depth as to what their responsibilities are supposed to be.
Great. Arthur, anything to add for the state agency side of things? Do you see RMOs having discussions with other units or offices about records retention?
Yeah, I do. I mean, RMOs work closely with different units and employees throughout the agencies in matters of records retention. I mean, we encourage agencies to, create records liaisons from different units that can like work with the RMO on records management issues, retention scheduling, things like that. As far as new employees, though, I mean, since we don't have any specific forms or letters or anything like that, but I would say that, discussion about records management, including things like retention, records retention, should be included sort of as part of the onboarding process. So you get a new employee, the RMO sits down with that person at some point and just sort of discusses records management responsibilities, what's to be expected, things like that. Just even, discussing and explaining records management. The person might not be particularly familiar with the, what it's all about. I would also say that having records management information and procedures in an agency policy document would be also something tangible for a new employee to like review and become familiar with, and also, to just have handy beyond the initial discussion going forward. And we also have all sorts of records management guidance on our website that new employees or even, long-time employees can turn to. So, there are a lot of resources available.
Definitely. And those are some good ideas to get people started. So our next question, currently we are split between paper and electronic records, and our electronic file management is lacking. We are hoping to move more into electronic records, but want to get what we have organized and have a good plan in place. Would archives recommend continuing use of shared network drives, or would something like a SharePoint library be better? Or something else entirely. Parentheses, the majority of our files are 7-year retention or perpetuity, if that helps. In this case, we're mainly talking about the 7-year retention electronic files. Also, we are working with our agency RMO as well, but they suggested we reach out for additional assistance. Arthur, this sounds like it might be a good one for you.
Yeah, so unfortunately we can't. Unfortunately, we can't recommend any systems in particular, but whatever you want to implement is going to be very dependent on your own particular resources and needs. So a LAN environment may be perfectly, acceptable for a small government or a small agency when it comes to managing electronic records. But a larger one with a lot of electronic records might benefit from something else, like a full-blown content management system like OnBase or Laserfiche or something like that. SharePoint's also an option to use, and the State Archives has actually begun discussing plans to transition at least some of our own central files to SharePoint. With some of the applications we use, it's easy and be useful to be able to link to files, which is something we can't always do on the LAN. But we also recognize that in some cases, it may make sense to continue to store files on the LAN, as staff may be more comfortable and familiar with using it. But whatever you choose, all of these are going to, require that policies and procedures on how they're used and created and followed in order for them to be successful. So unfortunately, there's really no one size fits all solution for state agencies, local governments. And as sort of been noted earlier, we have a webinar coming up in May that'll discuss file plans for paper and electronic records in detail. So if you're interested, you can also register for that.
Great. Sarah, anything you wanted to add for local governments?
No, Arthur really did cover what I'd have to say. Agencies and larger governments are going to have better access to information technology staff, whether they have their own department or they've contracted out. Often than smaller governments where it's, a couple people who have learned how to do computer stuff and have gotten very good at it. So you really do want to evaluate when you're putting in these systems what what you can do now, but also what your long-term resources are going to be, because you don't necessarily want to put your government in a situation where, yes, you are amazing. You know exactly what you're talking about. You can totally support this, complete records management system on servers that you're hosting in-house. But when you retire, what happens? So take that into consideration. Is there going to be somebody who can also manage that after you go, or are you better off looking at something that's going to be a cloud system, or utilizes the tools that you already have in place that are perhaps not as technical?
All right, great. So Rich, at this point, do we have any other questions from the crowd?
Yes, Jamie, we got a couple of questions here. We have one from Angela. Are there any specific requirements for redundant electronic storage, i.e. offset backups? We are transitioning to electronic filing of board and permit applications.
So we're looking for the records to be stored with a RAID array, and we recommend RAID 5 or higher if at all humanly possible. But beyond that, we don't have a lot of anything particularly granular.
Okay. Oh, just Angela just typed in offsite. I think she just wanted to.
Oh, okay, for offsite backups.
That's right. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no, okay, so when we're talking backups, we do strongly recommend that you have your backups outside of your immediate geographic region. It used to be zip code, it used to be area code. Area codes have gotten a lot smaller. Zip codes are generally not big enough because when you have a regional disaster, so you have a hurricane come through, or you have a blizzard or a tornado that hits most of a good chunk of your county. Um, if you have your backups just in the next town over, there's a good chance that they also got hit. So you want to have some decent geographic distance between you and your backups, which is a lot easier to do these days where you're not sending like physical tapes places. Things are going over the wires. But if you're in Albany, maybe think about having your backups out in Buffalo and vice versa.
Okay, we have a question here from Keisha. How do you change the culture towards records management when there wasn't an established department previously?
So, you're gonna have some fun. I'm not everybody likes their job the way it is. You know, they're very comfortable with the work that they're doing and how they do it. They've got their routines. And you can't just go in and change things immediately because that's going to cause a lot of pushback and a lot of challenges to get what you want to happen off the ground. So really you want to have a plan, you know, what are the changes that you want to make? And start small. Do you have, you know, are you just like trying to get people to put things in a centralized file area, or are you looking to overhaul entire business processes? Change management is something you're probably going to want to do some reading up on as to the best practices with regard to, you know, kind of convincing people to go in the direction you want to, but start with the folks in the departments that are most likely to be favorable to the changes that you want to make. That are going to be easy wins, but are also influential so that when you move on to the next department, you know, like don't do it all, your entire organization all at once. Start in one place and grow it out. I am making all these hand gestures that you cannot see. It's amazing. And, you know, work slowly. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And major changes are going to require, you know, a lot of support from management. Also, as you're making changes, make sure that you're talking to the folks that it's affecting, that you're getting their feedback, that you're incorporating it where you can. You know, you can't always, you know, keep things the way they were, but you know, if their concern is that the records that they use are going to be in a building three buildings over, then it's going to be a harder sell for those, and you have to figure out what the best solution for those folks is going to be. Arthur, do you have any ideas?
No, well, I mean, you pretty much covered it. It's definitely a challenge, but I mean, you definitely need to get management on board. And to do that, the best way to do that um, is through, you know, gentle persuasion and like, you know, discussions, assuming that you can, you know, arrange times to meet with management, but like just, you know, getting them to see and understand how important records management is, and the ways that it's beneficial, and also, you know, the potential pitfalls of not having a good records management program. And again, that's sort of the challenge, especially if, you know, you have a management culture that may not be particularly um, favorably disposed towards like listening to that. But I think that's sort of where you have to start because, you know, with management on board, getting other people on board is going to be, I think, probably easier. I mean, you can certainly cultivate a culture of records management within, you know, the agency itself, you know, on a lower level, but, you know, management, I think, is probably going to be a critical component of that.
Okay, you have one more question here from Agnes. Are paving bid documents of existing streets, not new streets, are these permanent records? Uh, Paving is usually considered a capital improvement, I believe.
Um, capital construction is generally considered to be can generally end up being permanent records. Let me see what I can do. All right, so you're going to want item 1070 in the retention schedule. Project file for capital transportation improvement covering highways, roads, streets, bridges, and other structures, parking lots and garages, and parking transportation systems improvement. So these are long-term records. It's 6 years after highway or structure no longer exists or is abandoned. So it's going to be a minute.
Rich, any other questions?
No, not for now,
Okay.
Jamie.
All right. Well, we will pick up where we left off on the slides then. So the question that we have is, we have a lot of personnel files for deceased employees. Do we have to keep these?
Yes.
Yeah, short answer is yes.
Yes. So we do not distinguish when people leave service and how they leave service. There's always going to be a course part of a personnel file that is permanent. And it doesn't matter if they're still working there, if they left because they retired, they got a new job, they died. It doesn't matter. You have to maintain permanent records permanently. There may be parts of their file that have shorter retention periods associated with them, and you can dispose of those records at the end of those retention periods. I know for the state, for the local governments, that is often triggered by when they left service, not how they left service. So, yeah, you're always going to have personnel files for deceased employees. I'm sorry.
It's I think it's a little different for state agencies. Personnel files for state employees only need to be retained for 6 years after termination of employment because the master summary record is maintained by the Department of Civil Service, so it's a little different. That's in the general schedule.
Oh, interesting. All
Yeah,
right,
the
great.
civil service ones are going to be permanent, though.
Yeah.
All right, so Arthur, this one's sounding like a you question. I'm an RMO at a state agency and we're getting ready to transfer records. What do I need to do to make sure everything's ready?
Sure. Well, that depends on whether you're planning on transferring archival records to the state archives or inactive records to the state records center. If you are intending to transfer records to the records center, then I'd suggest going to our website to review the process and instructions, since there are a number of specific requirements that are just too detailed to really address here. And maybe Rich can provide a link to that in the chat box. But if your records have been scheduled for transfer to the state archives and the minimum retention period has expired or been met, then you should contact the state archives accessioning and special project unit to make arrangements for their transfer. Before transferring them, agency staff should put together a container list that provides a brief description of the contents of each box and include this list with each box. We also have a template you can use as well as guidelines on our website. Boxes should be individually labeled by including the name of the agency, the relevant records disposition authorization number, box number, and a brief description of content, as well as the date range. And then a memorandum of transfer of records form also needs to be completed. This can be found on our website as well. And after completing the appropriate sections, print the form out and sign it. It can be mailed separately to us, or it can be included in the box of records to be transferred. So once the records have been processed and cataloged, and a signed copy of the transfer of memorandum of records will be mailed to the agency RMO for their files. So it's a process, and our website goes into some detail of that. You can also contact us if you want more detail about how to do that. But it's a pretty straightforward process overall.
Great. And might I add, state agency RMOs, as someone who is on the researcher services side of things for a little bit, the container lists are so, so, so helpful to us and to researchers and to the state agency themselves, because sometimes state agencies will ask for, certain records because they need to examine them for whatever reason. And it makes it a lot easier for people in the researcher services unit to find exactly what you're looking for by having that container list and a transfer list, if I'm getting my lingo right. So Arthur's got a lot of great information for you, and the website does too. All right, our next question. What is an inventory and why do people keep telling me that I need one? Sarah, did you want to maybe tell everyone why it's so important for local governments?
So an inventory is a list of all of the records that you have in your holding. It might not get down to the file folder or record level necessarily, it might just be at the box level, but it tells you what you have, where it is, what condition it's in, what retention schedule it is associated with it ideally, and what date range you're dealing with. You need to have one of these so that you can appropriately manage your records. If you don't know what you have, how can you manage it? So having that inventory allows you to determine where you have areas where records are being duplicated, or you're storing two sets of the same record, or where there's a gap in a series of records that you need to figure out what happened to those. If you're looking at digitizing your records, you want to make sure that when you do digitize a series, you get all of it at once and that you're not doing it piecemeal unless that's an intention of yours, so that you can identify where all of them are. If you're looking to set up a records room and you want to move all of your paper records to one place, you want to know where all of it is right now, how much of it you have, so you can determine if the space that you're selecting for it is going to be appropriate and is going to actually hold all of it. By the way, when you do that, you want to make sure that you have room for growth in that space that you're picking. Don't fill it up to into the gills and then be surprised when you don't have anywhere else to put those records. You want to make sure that you can continue to put records in that storage area. Also, when we talk about records inventories, we also don't want you just to have paper record inventories. We want you to have electronic record inventories as well, and that can be a separate process that can be done at the same time or at a different time, because the majority of the records that you're creating today, folks, are going to be electronic. I mean, if you sit down and think about it, when was the last time that you created a paper record? How often does that happen? And are those actual paper records that get stored, or are those just forms that are used for data entry and it becomes an electronic record? So you knowing what records you have electronically, where those are stored, who is the owner of those, what systems they're in, that's all very, very important. We've got webinars that talk about those, and we also have information on our website under records management that will help you do an inventory. So you need to have an inventory if you want to adequately manage your program, and you need to keep it updated.
Great. Arthur, anything state agencies should know about doing an inventory?
No, I mean, that was pretty thorough. It pretty much applies both state agency and local government, so I don't really have much to add to that.
All right. Our next question. My colleagues and I keep getting notifications that I'm running out of room in my inbox. What can I do? And what can I do to help future employees avoid this problem? Electronic records guru Sarah.
Okay, so again, I'm going to recommend you hit the email workshop later this year, but you've got a couple of problems going on here. One, there is the management of the email itself, because like we've been talking, we don't focus on the format that a record is in, we focus on the content. So if your inbox is running out of space, have you been disposing of things that are not records or are past their attention appropriately? So for example, when you get a memo from on high that got sent out to everybody in the organization, you're not going to be the official record keeper for that. Are you disposing of it when you no longer need to have access to that? Likewise, any advertisements that you get from the millions of vendors who have gotten your email address and are just sending you everything all the time, are you disposing of those when they're coming in as well? When Linda down the hall goes, "Hey, do you want to have lunch at 12:30? I'll meet you by the elevators." Are you throwing those out? These are things that help reduce the problem in your inbox even before you start applying retention schedules to it. After that point, then you are starting to look at retention issues with regard to how you're managing your records, whether there's an automated process or a manual process to parse those records. If you're looking at what we call a process called Capstone, which identifies account retentions based on who is the role of the owner of the account. Maria and Jamie are going to do a fabulous job talking about that later on. In you guys are in May, right?
No, we're actually in March. That was my bad. I was thinking
Oh,
about the file planning one, which is in May, that I am presenting with Vincent.
okay, yeah, no, I got tripped up on that too. So please attend that one because they will talk about that in much more detail than I can get into here. But the other problem you're having clearly is that you only have so much space allocated for email, and space issues are not a reason to delete things before the end of their retention period. It is not 1998. We do not have Yahoo accounts with barely any storage in them anymore. You should be talking to your IT department if you're the RAO, or if you're not the RAO, talking to the RAO so the RAO can talk to the IT department about how you can address that issue, because again, that's not a legal reason to dispose of records that you're running out of room.
Great. Rich, do we have any more questions in the chat? I see we've got a few minutes left.
Yes, we did have one, a similar question from Danielle, which Sarah just addressed. We are running out of room in our records room concerning permanent documents for those that have pa passed retention, I guess. I'm sorry, for those who have passed the deceased. Can we keep them digitally rather than physically if we follow established digital guidelines?
Hi Danielle. Yeah, no, it's you can, like I said, for the most part, digitize your paper records and keep the official copy electronically, so long as you're following the rules set out in the digital imaging guidelines on the website. Again, it's just those 1910 and older records you absolutely have to keep in paper, even if you do digitize them.
Okay, and the question here from Angela: do files that have been digitized and that have been passed their retention as paper have to be removed from the digital file per the retention schedule, or is that a preference for each organization?
Okay, so it doesn't matter whether it's paper or electronic, you want to follow the retention schedules as written. You don't want to hold on to things longer than you have to unless you have a reason to. Memory, while storage is cheap, but it's not that cheap anymore. And the more that you're saving, the more money you're spending on storing those records in a bunch of different ways. Particularly if you're using cloud storage, because you're spending money on how much space you're storing things. So when things are past the retention period, you do want to go through those files and parse them and get rid of things. Now, when you have complex files, I'm going to use student records, student academic files as an example, which have a couple of different retention periods associated with the file. You know, you've got your core permanent records, but you also have records that are 6 years after the kids have graduated, and then there might be tests or homework files in there that are like 1 year after 1 year after that was created. You may want to look at those and go, oh, okay, so we've got 6 years and 1 year's, 1 year records alongside these permanent records. Instead of going in there and getting the 1 year record, maybe you wait that 6 years past the retention and just dispose of everything in that file at that point that can get disposed of, as opposed to going in constantly every year and pulling a little more out and a little more out and a little more out. But that's something that if you decide to do, you want to document in your policies and do it consistently. It just introduces too much risk, potentially costs you too much money to hold on to records that you don't actually need to have.
Right, and I guess I'd like to add to that, like stress the risk part, like the legal risk potentially, like if there's legal discovery for any reason and you got rid of the paper records because that's what the retention schedule says, but you still have records, those same records in electronic format, those are still, fair game, and you'd still be required to um, you'd still be required to give them up and, the cost of looking for them and all that. So I mean, there's that foil too. So it's not just, the cost of storage. There's, like Sarah said, other risks involved.
Ooh, can I throw in the control of copies discussion here?
You sure can.
So like Arthur said, they don't care what format it's in. They will take whatever copy they can get their hands on. So if you still have a copy of a record, and even though the official copy was destroyed and you get a discovery action, they will take it. So this applies to copies that are distributed to staff. So say you have a memo, and the memo goes out to all staff. The official copy is held in let's say the superintendent's office. And the superintendent, maintains it or disposes of it as appropriate. Let's say they disposed of it. And, half of the staff threw theirs out after they read it going, yeah, whatever. If there's still copies of it floating around out there in staff files, the folks doing discovery will get a copy of that and they will take it. So you want to make sure that when you are disposing of the official copy of a record, that you're disposing of all copies as well. And that can get really complicated when you're talking about electronic records. So you do have to think about these things.
All right, great. Thank you both. So it looks like we're close to the end. So I wanted to pose a question to the viewers about what resource, webinar or tools you'd like to see from us. Unfortunately, I don't think we have much time to address it in the chat if anyone has any ideas, but we are always happy to hear from you with ideas like that, because you are the people that are using those tools and listening to our webinars. But if you also have other questions that weren't addressed here or something that comes to mind after the webinar, we are always here to help with retention, training, advice, and ideas. We love to have ideas bounced off of us. We truly do love talking about records management. If you do want to speak with any of us, you can always contact us at our email address. It's up on the screen. It's recmgmt@nysed.gov. So thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, you know how to reach us. Rich, anything else to add?
No, Jamie, I just want to again thank everybody for their participation, and the recording should be available hopefully in a day or two.
Great. Thank you everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, folks.